How can we differentiate within this blended learning environment? That's what we're going to talk about now. There are two possibilities that I use in the English classroom. One of them are hyperdocs and the other one are book clubs, and I'll explain both of these to you. I have to warn you, this is very text heavy. You might want to be prepared to stop the video, look up the resources that I'm talking about, and then come back to watching the lesson. So, a hyperdoc. About 6 years ago now, 5 years ago, this book came out, the Hyperdoc Handbook. A hyperdoc is simply a Google Doc that you push out through Google Classroom or through your Drive, whatever it is you're using, and students work on it. However, a hyperdoc is not just a digital version of a worksheet. It's not standardized. It's not inflexible, and it is not a handout. What it is, it can transform learning in your classroom because it is interactive, it is personalized, it is highly engaging for 21st century learners, and it's a tool that will help facilitate student creativity and collaboration. So, a hyperdoc there are many different designs, and they usually have these parts. There's always a part that captures your students' attention, that engages them. Then you give them a collection of resources for them to explore the topic that you want them to be learning about. These resources can be videos, they could be podcasts, they could be something that they read, or it could be something that they produce even at this level. This part is a two-way explanation. You make it very clear what you would like them to take away from the resources, and students can re-explain what they're learning through a variety of tools. Here, they take everything that they've learned here and they somehow apply it to make a product of their own. They could do this individually or they could collaborate to create something. Whatever they produce in the application stage, they then can share to an authentic audience. That audience could be just the other students in the class. It could be the entire grade. It could be the entire school. It could be out on the web for anybody to look at. So, hyperdocs, another really popular form, very popular with students, very engaging, is what they call the game board. Again, this is a digital document. You push it out through your Google Drive. They have their individual copies, and there's a variety of activities for them to do. They're all embedded hyperlinks that take them to websites that you've chosen and curated to really enhance their learning. So this is a hyperdoc I used last year very, very successfully. I had to teach Shakespeare to 7th graders. I had a class of 35 students. It's very hard to make Shakespeare engaging for middle schoolers. So I borrowed this hyperdoc from another teacher. I reworked it in some parts, but I really want to explain to you how the pieces fit together. First of all, I want you to put yourself in a student's shoes and you are delivered this document online. So our first opportunity for differentiation is up here. Here there are 8 different squares. The only required ones is number 2 and number 6. They have to choose a number of other ones to learn and show how they can apply concepts. The second page of the hyperdoc is related to the 2 required parts, and it's where the students write in the blanks. Then they digitally turn this document in back to you so you can check for understanding. So, differentiation. Here are the 2 points where you can really differentiate to meet your students' needs. The directions say that all students must do number 2 and number 6. These 2 activities address whatever your instructional objectives are. One is being able to make a prediction about the themes of the play, and the other is to do a close reading of a couple of lines of Shakespeare. All the other ones are free choice. All students are doing 2. You can make this number 3, 4, 5, or 6. I tend to add more on because students who need more time might only complete 4, but really as long as they do the required 2, they have learned what you've wanted them to learn. So if we look at this required one, they watch a short video that's a summary of the play. Then what happens is that they have to be able to predict what one of the themes of the play might be, and they have to show evidence from the video. They need to explain their thinking. This is a really powerful cognitive strategy. When kids are making predictions, they're bringing in all their previous knowledge and experience in literature to one piece of work to be able to predict themes and then understand where their predictions are coming from. Number 1, for example, are lines from the play, and it describes the setting of the woods in Midsummer Night's Dream. For your artists in your class, they can do a Google drawing, or they can do a drawing by hand on paper and take a picture and insert it on a class document so their classmates can see how they interpreted these lines. Here, again, for the artists, they can choose to create a small storyboard or little comic strip, either on the theme of fairies or on the theme of star-crossed lovers. Again, your students might not know what a star-crossed lover is, and you've embedded a link here that defines that and gives them examples. So the second row both involve something called Padlet. These are for kids who do not mind writing in a reflective and revealing way. One of them is they have to write about a dream that they've had. The other is writing about the silly things that love sometimes makes people do. They can connect it to a movie, they can connect it to a book, they can connect this idea to their own lives or something that they know to be true. Again, making these connections between yourself and the text, between one text and the other, between a movie and the text, between the real world and the text is a very powerful cognitive thinking strategy for your students. You'll see both of these things require something called Padlet. Padlet is a very powerful, free online tool that I would like to introduce you to. So, this is what Padlet looks like. You can open up a free account as an educator. You can have up to 3 Padlets, and your students simply log on with a link that you provide, and it comes out as kind of online stickers that can actually be very, very long. This is an example of something I'm actually working on right now. I have 6th graders who are reading Island of the Blue Dolphins. It's their first experience of really trying to find evidence for identifying a theme. So as they're reading, they're looking for quotes along 4 possible themes. And they're looking for quotes that by the end of the book might help them understand how the idea of bravery is developed, or the idea of loneliness is developed, or the idea of humans and nature is developed. Traditionally, we would hand the students a pile of yellow stickies. They would write quotes down as they encounter them. They might stick them in their books. They might stick them in a notebook. They might stick them on a poster in the classroom for everyone to see. But the problem with yellow stickies is that they don't always stay where you put them. So it means that all of this gets lost. This is where Padlet is really powerful. As they're reading and they find quotes that they think might be really important, they go to Padlet. They identify what theme they think this quote is addressing. They put it there, they put their page number, and then it becomes very social learning. Other people in the class can give it likes. Other people in the class can actually add comments and add their thinking. Over the course of a book, which could take 3 or 4 weeks before they write their essay, this Padlet might have 40 or 50 stickers on it. We can then organize them and put all the bravery ones in the left-hand corner, all the loneliness ones in the right-hand corner. And students have this social collection of evidence from the text to help them produce their literary essay. 2 other tasks require something called Flipgrid. Again, Flipgrid is an incredibly powerful online tool for the 21st century learner. If you haven't used it yet, I really urge you to try it out. I'll explain this assignment. So here they're given a short monologue from the play. It's a piece by Puck. And they're supposed to be able to rehearse, recite it dramatically, and then make a video of them doing this reciting on Flipgrid, as well as a reflection about Puck. So, what is Flipgrid? This is what Flipgrid looks like. Again, as an educator, you go there, you set up an account, you set up classrooms. Here you can see right now I have 4 different classrooms that I use Flipgrid on. Students go to the code and they log into your classroom, usually with their Google account. What they can do here is they each make individual videos. And you can set the time, 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, 2.5 minutes, 5 minutes, depending on how long you would like them to be able to speak for. This is incredibly important. One of the skills we don't often teach explicitly is the skill of presentation. How do you express your thinking with poise, with a strong voice, with appropriate gestures? Every time they do a Flipgrid, they are practicing these presentation skills. You can see in one semester, there's 5 days and 6 hours worth of video on my Flipgrid. Every video a class makes, the other classmates can see them, give them likes, give them thumbs up. Very engaging social learning for students, but at the same time, you're getting 2 things out of it. They are practicing their presentation skills and you can assess them, and they're also expressing their learning or their understanding. This is an example of the teacher's page. We were working on oral summatives. I made a video as a model of exactly what I wanted them to think about as they were making them. I have embedded questions here, and this little script here stays on their screen as they're recording. So they have little notes to help them to remember the things they need to include in their video. So how would I use this kind of hyperdoc in my classroom? This is a modification of the rotation model. This really depends on the size of your class. I would, of course, start off with a whole group mini lesson. I would review Shakespeare's pronouns, for example, and teach them the rules about that. Then I would actually have the entire class online for half the class period, working on their hyperdoc, working on all these different activities. Halfway through, it would be the end of technology use, and we would move into acting games. Acting games can get really noisy. You need a lot of room to do them. It loosens them up orally. It loosens them up physically. They get used to expressing themselves in movement. So we tend to spend the first half of the class, everyone independently online, hyperdoc, then we push all the desks aside and we do acting games. The way I teach Shakespeare is we do not start at the beginning of the play and read it. Students need to learn Shakespeare by acting. So what they do is they have groups of troops. Each troop has a long scene that they are expected to block, to stage, to memorize, and within 3 weeks they will have to perform those scenes for the class. After we do these activities, it would probably take them 2 or 3 days to finish this hyperdoc, 2 or 3 days to really become more confident about being on stage. And then we would a whole group reflection. I really like the powerful, simple one. After they go through this kind of learning experience, they write, and they follow along the lines of, I used to think, but then I learned, and now I think. These 3 short sentence starters really help students reflect on their own journey as learners. So the last thing I want to talk about is other ways you can differentiate in the English classroom to meet the needs of 21st century learners and the diverse learners you are going to have in your classrooms. So, you might have a unit about historical fiction if you're going to be an English teacher. You might have a statement of inquiry that looks something like this. Authors can use characters living in different eras to convey how setting influences perspective. Until relatively recently, almost all English classes, the teacher would choose one text and every student has to read the same text at the same time, at the same pace to be able to answer this question. But you need to meet the needs of diverse learners. They have different strengths and needs as readers, as thinkers, and as writers. How would reading one book help these students? One thing I want you to think about is really think about classroom book clubs instead. So we know students have to be reading historical fiction and making connections to history. The way I have set it up in the past is to give 3 different texts for students to choose. For every text, I provide 3 things. I provide the lexile level, I provide the book length, and I usually provide at least one book trailer to give them a rich visual of what the book might be about. For some books like The Book Thief, you could actually show them the movie trailer, which would be very, very engaging. This information is really important for students. You might have a student who is a strong reader, but a non-reader. They hate reading long books, in which case they might choose this book, the shortest one, which is, however, the most difficult one to read. But they figure it's only 160 pages, I can get through that. You might have a student who's both a struggling reader, but likes to read. They might be willing to go with this book. It's the easiest book, and it's only 200 pages. You might have your avid readers or your really strong readers. They might go for The Book Thief. The Book Thief is actually simpler than I Heard the Owl Call My Name, but it is 608 pages. You can't expect your entire class to read this book. So you're giving student choice. If you think back on the station rotation model, probably instead of rotations every day while they're actively reading the book, you could have 3 discussion groups going on, 3 literature circles, 1 for every book. The literature circles could be very powerful. Students create their own reading plan for the group, their own expectations, and you can get them to write their own questions and create their own roles as well. So this is a really powerful way to address the unit question through a variety of texts. So let's say, however, that you're in a school and you only have 1 book to teach. How do you teach that book and still meet all the needs of a 21st century learner? I did this with The Book Thief. If you think back at The Book Thief, relatively easy to read for a middle schooler or a 9th grader, but it's really long. And your non-readers or your struggling readers will be very intimidated by such a long book. You have to be very careful as an English teacher and try and decide what it is you want students to learn through your classroom. You basically want them to be creative and critical thinkers. That does not require reading an entire book. So one way of addressing this is to have 1 book and have what we call paired texts. And this will help them make connections through diverse texts with the book. Here's the secret, however. You don't have to have the kids on a reading plan and expect them to read large amounts of text. You can take extracts from a book, you can print them out, have them do a close reading of just that extract. It could be 1 chapter, it could be just part of a chapter, it could be a really important scene in the book. But the important part is that the extract is not more than 3 or 4 pages. You then work through a series of texts that somehow relate to this. It is the student's job to start thinking critically and making the connection between diverse texts, and then synthesize what they're learning to help them answer the unit questions. So, one of my favorite sources, which I'll talk about in a minute, is something called Common Lit. Again, the free version is very robust for you and your students. I looked up The Book Thief, and these are the paired texts that Common Lit gave me. I didn't use all of them when I taught The Book Thief, but I did use most of them. So Common Lit will provide informational articles, one on Adolf Hitler and one on a woman who helped Anne Frank. These are very rich connections to have students actually understand what is going on in The Book Thief. Common Lit also provides 2 poems, Hope is a Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson and Languages by Carl Sandburg. Again, 2 very short texts, very rich, and they can make very creative and rich connections to the text. Lastly, there's an excerpt from Black Beauty as well as a fable, The Lion and the Mouse, for them to make connections between 2 sorts of fiction texts. So I just really want you to think about Common Lit as an English teacher. It is free. There is a paid version, but I've always just used the free version. This is why Common Lit is so powerful. It's online reading for the kids. Of course, you have the choice of just downloading the article, have it on paper, have kids mark it up. But last year, I had 168 students total. I was not going to print 168 pieces of paper. So I had them read it online. This is the great part. You can do this in your blended learning environment. Kids can personalize this. They can change the font size, for example. What's really powerful here, they can annotate it, they can highlight, any word that they don't know, they can look up. And if they're a struggling reader, they can also listen to the entire text being read, and then they can read along. Common Lit also provides questions for them to check their understanding. If they don't understand the answers to the questions, that's their signal to go back and reread the text. Again, as an English teacher, this is a very powerful tool for you while you are teaching fiction. So let's review what we've learned in this lesson. We've looked a little bit at the needs of the 21st century learner. We've learned how to move from teacher-centered to student-centered learning by using a couple of paradigm shifts. One is moving toward blended learning using station rotations. The other is using hyperdocs. And lastly, we've learned how to differentiate using either book clubs or what are called text pairings. So you do have homework for this section. It's a document you can get on bit.ly. This is the URL, bit.ly/GTU hyperdoc. So it is a couple of pages. It is a hyperdoc. One thing I really want you to take away is learning how to create a hyperdoc. You'll go through engaging, exploring, explaining, and applying. For each section, you're only asked to choose 2 resources to look at. For every section, you just type in your thinking, and you move through the document that way. And then there's the direction on the document to turn it into either someone in your class or to your professor for them to review. So thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is dianaholmes@branksome.asia, and I wish you luck through your teaching journey.